So welcome back to episode 13, I believe it is, of the We Love Ugly Data Deep Analysis podcast. I'm here. Alan's here. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
A bit like last month when we recorded a little bit early because we wanted to make sure we caught Dan before Dan went on his travels. We recorded this one a little bit early, right at the tail end of March, just before the long Easter weekend, at least in the long Easter weekend in the UK, and before Alan goes on loads of travels. So it's kind of like the same as before, but with different faces. The other thing, of course, which is the same as before, is the format. And as we know, part of the format is telling you the format. So here's the format. The format is 3 topics, 30 minutes. It's quite a packed agenda tonight, so we're probably going to struggle to keep on time, but I will do my best. And that reminds me, I haven't actually set the stopwatch going for it, so that's a really good start. So let me just do that to make sure I can keep on some kind of time. So there we go. It's a little bit over 30 minutes from the stopwatch. But anyway, to go straight into the first topic. So Alan, as you know, the Work Intelligence Market Analysis 2024 to 2029 is now out. Last month, you talked to Dan very much about his IDP version. This month is the Work Intelligence one. I know you've been very au fait with my progress in getting this peer-reviewed and out. So hopefully you remember what's in it when you were proofreading it and being my peer review. So for those of you who are listening, up on screen, I've got a photograph of on screen of the cover, but also just a little bit of an introduction to those of you who maybe haven't followed Work Intelligence previously, to give you an idea about what are the kind of sets of technologies and ideas which are in it. So Work Intelligence is it really looks at the technologies that help us understand processes and the people that operate them and help us produce more healthy organizations. What does that mean in practice? It means kind of 4 technology chunks, 4 technology markets, if you like, sub-markets that go together to make up what we call Work Intelligence. One of those we call mining intelligence, which is very much the task mining, process mining, some of the, I guess, decision intelligence is referred to as well. So some of the predictive analytics around this, as well as sort of the digital twinning, kind of making digital models of your organization to try simulations on. And also, just on the edge of that, not many people have this, but communications mining falls into that. Then we have the area of programmatics, which is very much our way of bundling together no code, low code, and I guess to an extent some of the pro code tools as well. And that sort of edges a little bit towards RPA, some of the data management platforms, but really kind of traditional rules engines as well as pulling in, the edges of some of the data management things, the sort of data lakes and data fabrics and nibbling around the edge of iPaaS, even, if you like. Work engines, we'll come to why they make up a big chunk of this overall thing, even though they're probably perhaps the most mature, therefore maybe also the least exciting, I don't know, but they certainly, in terms of revenue, make up the biggest chunk, which is work engines, which is the BPM, BPA, big oily software things on which organizations have relied on to run big chunks of their processes over the years. And the final bit, task execution, that's pretty much RPA, as well as other tools which go together to batch up things like, VBA macros and batch processes and all those sort of things that we used to write to keep organizations going. Is that a reasonable summation of it all, Alan?
Yeah, it is. I mean, in broader market terms, when people are talking about enterprise automation, this is what they're talking about, really, right?
Yeah.
Because it's usually not one, but a number of these tools working in harmony. Right, and platforms are emerging for sure, which bundle them all together. But an RPA tool without doing some task mining beforehand probably isn't a great idea. So yeah, but this is sort of what we've been talking about a lot, is that these standalone markets, traditional sort of analyst silos, are blurring. I mean, they are technically still, independent and different from one another, but in buyers' eyes, they are blurring.
Well, indeed. I mean, and I think all markets exist in the sense that we're producing this report. They exist because analysts say they exist, because we've drawn a red line around these things and said, right, everything on one side, this side of the line is this, and on the side of the other line is that, and that's how we define them, and this is how we define the market. because it helps us, build that kind of demarcation. As you said, for customers don't really know or care outside, I guess, the rarefied atmosphere of the office of CIOs who take these things very seriously, because they're probably the people who are looking at this in a more strategic way. But when customers are thinking about this, they're working from the business problem backwards. This is the problem we have inside our business. How can we go about solving it, rather than, well, I need to be compliant because I need to have one piece of technology out of each of these analyst defined buckets. And when I have reached IT nirvana, if you like, if I have all those things. Sadly, that's not how it works. It would actually be easier if it did work in that way, but that's not actually how it works at all. But of course, within the report, which I think is 50 pages of exciting analysis, and I say that with tongue in cheek as the person who primarily wrote most of it, it is kind of interesting in a slightly inside baseball way, like all market analysis are. But what I've got up on screen now is just a selection of the charts that are within the report, one of which is in last year's report and in this year's report, and funnily enough, hasn't changed very much at all. And on the other side of the screen, and we'll come to that in a second, are two charts that weren't in last year's report, are in this year's report, and therefore have changed quite a lot. So we'll deal with those in order. So first of all, on the left-hand side of the screen, for those of you looking, is the top 10, easier for me to say, top 10 work intelligence revenue contributors. So within our market analysis, which are the top 10 vendors by the amount of revenue they generate out of their work intelligence tooling? So not everything, but out of their work intelligence tooling. How are we estimating those? And within that top 10, we've got a lot of organizations that people will know, and maybe one or two that they don't. But it gives you an idea about really within a market, which right now is that's spoiling the entire report, is around 15 billion. We can see that our estimation is that the top of that is sort of Oracle with about 2.7, Microsoft with about 2.61, and SAP with 2.55. And those three are far and away the largest revenue generators in there. And of those pieces of revenue, the overall majority of those are coming from BPM, BPA, work engine sort of stuff. Microsoft perhaps a little bit less, a little bit more diverse than that, but that's where the bulk of that's coming from. That shouldn't be a big surprise, really, Alan.
No, it's not a big surprise, because I mean, in terms of enterprise applications, these are the three heavy hitters anyway.
Yeah. And
at the end of the day, if you're automating business processes, well, almost by default, you're going to be you're going to be in the world of business applications, finance, HR, supply chain, whatever. And so, yes, that's no surprise. You on your chart, there's a couple of specialists there, people like Pega, who've been around a very long time, and Appian have been around a long time. I mean, I think, the interesting thing is relatively newer names. I mean, UiPath and Automation Anywhere being the obvious ones, but these are, and this is what we were saying about how markets are starting to blur, right? UiPath, they're not just an RPA vendor anymore, is the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, of those top three you mentioned, probably the most diversified in terms of the number of parts of work intelligence they fall into is Microsoft. They've got a finger in virtually all of those pies, and quite considerable chunks. We look down, sort of, I think it's 8 on that list is Celonis, who is probably the largest single vendor that only exists in sort of one area, which is the mining intelligence area. It's the biggest independent process and task mining vendor by a significant distance, around about half a billion dollars in revenue.
Definitely not giving stock tips here, but I mean, I wouldn't be too surprised if Microsoft end up at top of that list in a couple of years' time, just because of the sheer momentum now behind Power Automate. It's just, I think I mentioned on a previous podcast, I was at their event in Vegas at the tail end of last year, and I got to be honest, I was stunned. I mean, I honestly thought it would be a tenth of the size it was.
Well, indeed. And we don't do this on screen. It's in the report. Should you wish to read it or buy it, subscribe and read it. Obviously within those revenue numbers, as you said, because Microsoft is most diverse, some of the areas where it has a bigger chunk than the others are faster moving parts of that market. With BPM is about a 2% CAGR over time. Mining intelligence is significantly higher than that. Programmatics is higher than that. So I would be surprised if that overtakes it next year based on the models we have. The other side of the chart, which we had in here previously, and if you've read a blog post and a discussion that Dan and I had last month about some of the challenges around how we go to make up these models, we've got some of the work intelligence by global vendor locations, and that's been a discussion about that last month, where we can see 54.3% of those are in the US. We can also see work intelligence by employee numbers, where we can see that 42% of all the vendors that we cover are in the 1 to 50 employee market, so relatively small in there. Lots of caveat emptors. I'll put the things in the show notes for those that we talked about last time. But thinking about those work intelligence, global vendor locations, as we discussed last time, in that 54% in the US, one of those is going to be UiPath, which is very much Romania's great technology startup story. So if you want to understand why that might be interesting and why that might be an interesting piece of data, if you're a bit of a data nerd, then go ahead and read that.
And also when it comes to employee numbers, I think I might be wrong, but I think it also tells a bit of a tale. When you're in the automation world, you tend to know a particular industry very, very well. A lot of those smaller firms, yes, they've got good technology, but they've also got real experience in insurance or whatever. And so so the fact that they're 1 to 50 doesn't mean that they are flailing or failing companies. Far from it. Many of those
or necessarily that they're startup.
Nice, or not even necessarily a startup. There's many well-established and profitable businesses.
But looking at that, just before we move on, 8.7% are over 5,000. Now, of course, we could look at that revenue chart on the left-hand side and pretty much pick out which organisations are those which are over 5,000 in number. In fact, pretty much everybody on the left-hand side would probably in that general area. I think maybe certainly the top 6 or 7 would be in that over 5,000 employees kind of an area. So work intelligence market analysis is out now. You can buy it as a standalone, but obviously subscribers have had access to it. It's been out for a couple of weeks, so I'm sure it's all been read cover to cover by everybody inside the subscriber organizations, and if they haven't, I'll be coming to knock on the door to find out why not. But another topic that's kind of related, and this kind of happened around the same time as we were putting to bed the analysis, was that we heard that that one of our favorite work intelligence startups from Finland, Workfellow, was sadly gone out of business at the beginning of February, which is very sad for us for a couple of reasons. One is that we don't want to hear anybody going out of business. Two, we really enjoyed talking to them in the past. In fact, Alan wrote a very, very nice piece, a blog post, which I'll put up on the screen and we'll have in the show notes for you. You can read a little bit about them. So interesting technology, interesting company, really nice people. We wrote a vendor vignette about them. I don't know, about 16 months ago or something like that. Yeah. So it was sad to see them not make it out of that sort of startup area. The reason I pull that is, one, because I think it's very easy to look at all areas of startup and think that everybody in an emerging, interesting market is a roaring success. As Dan and I talked about last time in reference to baby birds, they have to eat really quickly in the nest to grow to a certain weight to actually better fledge. Not everybody's able to make that. From a Workfellow perspective, they're clever people. I suspect all of them have already got something to go to already. But it does actually. I'm going to pull out some more data from the Work Intelligence report just to give you an idea about where that sector of the market is. But Alan, do you want to comment?
Oh, it was just to say, I mean, it is sad, but I mean, we've got, when we take a step back and just be objective across, whether it's the IDP stuff, whether it's automation, whatever. The reality is there are too many vendors. I mean, that's the hard reality. There are too many vendors, and they're not all going to succeed. the harsh truth is, as an analyst, you meet so many of them. You'd like to think it's because they have the best technology that they succeed, but it's never as simple as that. And I do think companies in Europe are at a disadvantage often, particularly once they're up and running, because they don't have such easy access. I say easy, it's still hard work and there's no guarantees, but there just isn't the pots of money that they can get in the US. And so if they hit a bump, it can be very difficult. Whereas there are startups that we know and have known over the years who've had 3, 4, 5, 6 years of never making any money, but there's enough money to support them until their day comes. And not everybody, and certainly not in Europe, there's just a lot of them just don't have that luxury.
Yeah, and I think without wanting to retweet everything you wrote in your blog post, I mean, there's 2 areas, and one of them is exactly as you said. I mean, what I put up on screen is a couple of bits of a couple of data points from the Work Intelligence report. One on share of market value by those sub-markets, so the mining intelligence, programmatics, task execution, and work engines. Then the figure next to it is those same subsectors by share of active funding. And the reason I brought those up is to give you an idea of, where money is being invested. And active funding typically is companies which are in this, the from seed through to series, A, B, C, etc. So basically before they have become public, as many companies do, or before that funding has kind of cashed out, if you like. So it gives you an idea to an extent of where that market maturity is. Now, if we look at mining intelligence, which is the area that contains task and process mining, which of course which includes that big chunk that we saw just now on a previous chart from Celonis, is actually only 6.9% of the overall work intelligence market pie. Of that 15 billion, only 6.9% of it is mining intelligence. But if we look at the active funding chart on the right hand side, and I'll read those out for those who can't see it, the 6.9% of the actual market is 55% of the active funding share. So it gives you an idea that it's the smallest chunk in terms of how much money is being generated, but it's the largest chunk. In fact, over half of the active funding out there right now is for vendors in that mining intelligence area. So process mining, task mining.
Yeah, and we've been sort of vocal advocates for mining intelligence products because I honestly believe we're already at a point where you shouldn't be doing any serious project without the use of these. Now, that's not the case. We know they're more widely used in Europe than they are in the US. I mean, there's an adoption challenge, which will continue. But when you're in this world of very complex legacy implementations and systems that are not going away, and at one end of the spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum, you've got all the hype around AI and generative AI and whatever. You really should not be embarking on a serious project without using these first to find out what you're really dealing with. You really shouldn't. So they have tremendous potential. The challenge at the moment, and hence the funding, right? I mean, people see the potential. Where it goes, I'm not sure. I could imagine a future date where this is essentially bundled functionality, if you know what I mean. Because, I mean, we're talking about the difference of having a business analyst sit and watch somebody and scribble notes for 5 hours at their desk, right? Versus and drawing up complex flowcharts versus finding out what's actually happening, right? At precise levels. So it's a bit of a mystery in a sense why it hasn't got more buzz behind it. I mean, AI's got all the buzz and the hype. This hasn't. Well, it's got some money behind it, but it hasn't got the buzz yet. So
picking up on a little bit of that, you're right. The second big factor right now is that we haven't got to that point of a sort of adoption traction, particularly for task mining, which is very much where Workfellow were as an example, where process mining through the the amount of sort of good market hype that Solonis has generated, the process mining is sort of beginning to tip forward. Task mining less so, but neither yet have got to the point where they've got real market traction. And as you say,
no, go on.
And there are different ways. Going back to when we saw Microsoft earlier on, Microsoft very much looked at through their acquisition of Mineit, is building out process tools very much as an adjunct to their power apps, right? If you want to build automations, you should be able to do analysis first. 2 thumbs up from us. That's what we see. But they see very much as being bundled as part of Power Automate. If we look, when we were talking to Apromore from Australia, who own these numbers, they're in an active partnership now with Salesforce, where it's very much sitting in the kind of MuleSoft part of Salesforce's architecture for doing the same kind of thing. So you could say for that the technology may well be sitting as a big feature set, but a feature set as part of a larger automation plan.
Yeah, as I say, it just needs to get some more buzz around it. I'm not going to name the company, but a very big business applications company I was talking to, they to quote them almost literally, and I think literally, was we would use that kind of thing on big projects.
Yeah,
what you should use it on every project.
Mm-hmm.
Because those little projects could be the ones that come back and bite you when you find out you didn't realize the mess that was underneath. Anyway, we'll see. But it's interesting. But it's a market that could really do with some hype and buzz around it.
Yeah, and of course, there's in the report. I mean, we actually say, sure, start with projects, but you really need to be operationalizing this over time as well. As projects are a good place to start, and as you said, it should be across the board a standard part of your toolkit. Should be that, but also operationalizing it, and of course, to be legally compliant within the report. There's a big chunk about how those tools should really be helping with your generative AI projects. Being able to understand how we do that, really important. Brings us neatly on to our third topic today. The topic we're calling Rag Slam. This is not a wrestling competition, although it sounds like a wrestling competition. One of the things that happens when you finish updating a large publication, as I did with the Work Intelligence report, is you then start thinking, right, well, I'll give myself a 24 hours of rest, and then we'll look at the next big publication to be updated for me in a few months' time. So I need to start researching that, and that's the desktop AI revolution report that I put out last September, I guess. So I'm starting to already gather that together. And one of the first things that happened within that was me starting to look what happened in the intervening period of time around generative AI and really the big information architectures. Big yawn, I know, information architectures, but the information architectures still, which are beginning to exist around generative AI, and realizing they kind of have to exist around AI. So I wrote a blog post. A screenshot is up on the screen now for people who are watching this, called Models and the Rag Trade, where I ask, we've gone in a pretty short period of time from, hey, this is Gen AI, ask it anything and it'll tell you an answer, to, well, we've actually got to put a whole difficult piece of scaffolding around generative AI, because it'll give you some kind of answer, but you've got to give it loads of context. In fact, actually, maybe we should avoid asking it very much, because most of the questions kind of probably we already have the answers inside our organizations. We've gone from the supreme, oracle, ask it anything and it'll tell you anything, to, oh God, whatever you do, don't ask it anything, in quite a short period of time. I'll put links to that in the show notes as ever. So one of the things that I think we always read when something like retrieval augmented generation, or RAG for short, comes up, it must have just popped out of nowhere, and surely this is something that has only cropped up since Gen AI became well known to everybody. Well, it turns out that's not the case. Actually, the first part, and I got up on the screen the original research, which was done by a research team from Meta along with University College London, where they were already pointing out in this is 2020 that large language models have their limitation. The quote I pulled out from the introduction is that large pre-trained language models have been shown to store factual knowledge in their parameters and achieve state-of-the-art results when fine-tuned on NLP tasks. However, their ability to access and precisely manipulate knowledge is still limited, and hence on a knowledge-intensive task, their performance lags behind task-specific architectures, which is a fancy way of saying they can do some really good things, but the knowledge is quite general. If you want something specific, you have to give it something specific. And it's that RAG pattern that we were referring to a little bit as grounding, I think, until relatively recently, still referring to as grounding, that sort of come in and made the Gen AI story seem a little less magic, which is probably bad, because magic would be lovely if it happened. As we discussed before, there's no such thing as magic.
Yeah, and you said a little bump. I do wonder if this is going to be a big bump in the road. We've talked about it many times before, and I'm sure. So I'm starting my travels, and on my travels, I have absolutely no doubt this topic's going to come up regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have all the knowledge inside your company, so maybe you can build a SLAM, a small language model, right? You know, because you've got all this stuff. Yeah, you got a lot of other stuff too, and which one's the right one, and what kind of place is it stored in, and what kind of state is it in, blah 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 blah, right? I mean, these are just basic challenges, but they're potentially huge challenges. And it comes back to the, hey, isn't Gen AI fun? Yes, it is. Is it useful? Yeah, it is. We're not knocking it, but this is limiting. I mean, I don't think much money's being made out of this at the moment. That's for one thing. And secondly, do I trust it? Right? Because if I can't trust it implicitly for my work, I'm not using it.
So let's take a few of those in order, and let's maybe just park trust as a bigger topic, because I think we probably can't get to that today in the remaining time. And actually, in a whole 30 minutes, we're not going to solve the trust issue. What I've got on screen right now for those people who are watching is an existing high-level Microsoft architecture from last year, which actually I used in the Workplace AI market analysis report that I'm actually updating. So I've got that on screen, and that gives you an idea about how Microsoft see the world, which is very much, hey, you've got 365 apps, and we've all got 365 apps in our organization. If you're a big Microsoft house, you're also putting all of your stuff into the Microsoft Graph. Of course, within that, there's a whole set of vagaries about permissioning and what can the graph see and not what can the graph see. But that's, you know, something that all users on Microsoft Graph need to grasp anyway. And that sort of set of data is what is grounding, or as I referred to typically at that point in the architecture, which seems like a long time ago, but actually only last year where everything was grounding. And that's sort of then being compared to the prompts or adding context to the prompts that are going towards the large language model. And if we kind of jump forward to this year, what I've got up on screen is very much more of a marketing architecture, this time from Salesforce. I've seen, you know, how the world looks a bit more like inside 2021, where we're less talking about grounding. We're now talking about retrieval augmented generation on every slide, as if it's a brand new thing. But as we discussed, it's been around since pretty much everybody had heard of LMMs, or very much it's a big chunk alongside, you know, data graphs and AI search, which are, you know, the standard part of what makes you know, Gen AI work if you're a large application house. And the thing is, both these diagrams are saying exactly the same thing, which is, here is the brightly covered scaffolding which we need to build in your enterprise to hold together, making Gen AI work for you.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we were talking about, hype, right? Hype isn't always a bad thing, right? You got to hype something up. I mean, I'm a very passionate rugby league supporter. I wish we'd have a bit more hype for our game. But Gen AI has had it all, right? And now reality's coming about, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing, but it is going to slow things down. It is going to slow things down, and yeah. And I think there's already a clear shift now at the enterprise level, right, towards not just the general massive large language models, to reduce the scale of them and
Yeah,
hopefully
so
improve the accuracy of them.
well, the reason why was RAG SLAM, and we've covered RAG and RAG quite a lot in this little topic, is that enterprises, I've got a broader toolkit to work with than it felt like at first. It's not just ask the Oracle, small O in this case, although you could ask the big O as well. They're also in this game. You know, using RAG and using your own knowledge sources is one of the way of solving this. Another one is looking at developing your own, I've referred to in the blog as mid-scale models, but you, I think, had borrowed the term SLAM from one of
the actually. I'll give shout out to Bryant Duhan, one of the nicest guys in the industry. I think he came up with it in the sense that I got it from him. I think he came up with it. SLAM.
Well, talent borrows and genius steals. So if I've been probably stealing it, it's probably a good idea. But you know, there are all sorts of difficulties, but challenges in actually building out these models. Not lost because of the enormous amount of time, power, resources required in doing it. So, you know, are you going to build an organizational specific small language model just for you? It's probably for most organizations not, unless you're actually a large enterprise for doing it. Building them out that work horizontally across, you know, certain specialist areas. And I mentioned, you know, financial, legal, clinical, medical as being examples where, to the extent those are already being built, as good examples where those mid-scale models or SLAMs come along. Organizations really are realizing as they're starting to build it, at least from those that we're talking to, is that what those early experiments will tell you is that they're really exciting. However, in order to make them actually fit within the processes that they want to make work, that would be really good, but it'd be really nice if we could use this store of data we've already got. That's really nice, but wouldn't it be really good if it was cognizant of this industry set of terms, this industry taxonomy, this industry set of ontologies, which are really important to us in, you know, our industry. And when those elements come along, that the stuff that takes it from 80%, 85% accurate to 95 to 98% accurate. So basically that moves it from interesting to actually industry deployable is really where an awful lot of that additional cost is going to come.
It does. I do sense though that I hope I'm wrong actually, but when we were all getting excited about enterprise blockchain 6-7 years ago, it was all about the consortiums, right? It was all about industry consortiums coming together and fixing things. And it didn't work because they did a lot of talking, but nobody actually wanted to share anything. And this is going to happen. I think it's going to be a bit slower. Yeah. And I think, you know, I mean, the logic for life sciences, I mean, it's just so obvious that they should be doing something like this. Will they share their data with one another?
Well, I think another trend to watch, and I'm offering no inside track here. I did write a blog related to it earlier this week, which we may cover another thing, may not at all, but I'll put the link in the show notes, is that some of the quite well-funded LMM producers are starting to run out of road, if you like. Microsoft have just hired a big chunk for their internal. So the idea that as an independent organization, you can just produce good LMMs and that's your business. I think that oxygen may be fading in that particular room already. You know, large amounts of VC have gone in, but it would seem that as a standalone business, those are already basically hitting the enormous cost of standing them up versus really the lack of enterprise maturity to actually sell any of them yet. There's
the problem. Yeah,
and there's huge amounts of capex or money, spare money, cash from the very, very big vendors being burnt in standing up their various co-pilots and associated products already, which is a whole nother topic to come to. But that's it. We can't cover that today. That's the end. That's the end of the podcast. That's our 3 topics in 30 minutes. Thank you ever so much for joining us, Alan. Good luck on your travels. We'll catch up with you when you're back.
Yep, I'm flying out tonight and then back out on Friday, then back out on Monday. So back to the old days, huh?
Excellent. Yes. I shudder at the recollection of red-eye economy flights. So next time, 3 more topics, 30 minutes discussing them. Thank you very much for joining us. See you then.
Cheers.